We're on meeting.
Okay.
Ready.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Monday, April 8th, 2024 Peninsula Clean Energy Executive Committee meeting. We apologize for being a few minutes late. We were just waiting for quorum. With that, I'm going to have a roll call, please. Nellie?
I want to call your jurisdiction. If you'll please state your name, and a reminder when you're giving comment today to please state your name before comment so that the public can tell who's speaking. San Mateo County. Atherton.
Rick DeGolia.
Thank you. Brisbane.
Colleen Hampton,
Burlingame.
Donna Wilson,
East Palo Alto.
Carlos Romero admittedly arrived at 10:05.
Millbrae.
Anders Bell.
San Marino.
Marty Medina.
Thank you. Portola Valley.
Jeff Ellis.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Okay, fantastic. I do not believe we have any teleconference participation under 249449. So we'll move on that. Can I please have, let's take comments from members of the public on items not on the agenda today. Were there any comments sent in, anything online or in the room? Anyone in the room?
No comments sent in, no public in the room, and doesn't look like any public comment online.
Okay, fantastic. All right, we'll take an action to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda items. I don't even believe there are any consent agenda items.
There are not, just to set the agenda.
I'll move.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Carlos Romero and a second by Marty Medina. Director Medina, all those in favor, let's have a roll call vote again. Do we need one? Because we don't
No
have.
roll call needed.
Okay, so all those in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, we don't have a chair report today or a CEO report today. So we're going to jump right into item number 3, which is the Board of Directors continue pursuing an evaluation of a possible prepaid bond transaction, including approval to join the California Community Choice Finance Authority at the appropriate time and the nearer term engagement of financial advisor, prepaid counsel, and tax and bond counsel. This is an action item. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Nick. I think, are you running this or Sean?
I'm gonna tee it up.
Okay, you
Then
tee it up
turn
and
it
Nick's
to
going to go.
That's all right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You better make a long drive.
A terrible golfer, so
Homer.
let's hope I do this better.
The devil-handed tens.
All of you read the packet, and many of you have sat through presentations in the past on this topic. I do just want to say that this came to us, I believe, a year ago, really through Rick and Marty, and perhaps, I'm not sure if you were there, oh, it was Carlos. At last year's Cal CCA meeting, there was a presentation about this topic from Garth Salisbury, who is the CFO at MCE. He also is on the board at CCCFA, as noted in your packet. He also staffs that on behalf of all of the CCAs that have gone before. And this has been before this committee and audit and finance, I believe, at least once. So the idea here is that it's coming back before you today. Nick did, I thought, a great job trying to put everything into a narrative without using lots and lots of complicated charts, but I see there's one over there. I'd have to check that out. So with that, I just wanted to set us up a little bit and then turn it over to Nick for the next step. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Great. So a little background on what a prepay is. I will try to keep this somewhat high level. We could get buried in the weeds. There's a schematic in the appendix. When we presented to the Audit and Finance Committee, I put the schematic up front, and I think we ended up getting sidetracked a little bit, but I'm happy to go through detail on how it works. I'm happy to take feedback on maybe a better schematic. I tried my best to summarize in sort of a word form in the document, but it is a complex, very structured transaction. I'll try and bring it up, but I'm not trying to say the details aren't important. I'm just want to sort of try and elevate it for a good conversation if it's something we want to proceed with. But in a summary, a prepaid transaction is a long-term financial arrangement that's available specifically for tax-exempt entities such as PCE that can allow for meaningful power procurement cost savings. In a nutshell, and again, there's a lot of moving pieces, the savings are based on the difference between tax-exempt interest rates and taxable rates. So what we would essentially do is we would issue, or actually CCFA would issue on our behalf, tax exempt bonds. I'm gonna use an even number of, say, at 4% interest rate. We would then take those proceeds from the bonds and lend them to another counterparty, usually a bank or maybe a financial intermediary, an institutional investor, could be insurance fund, and they would pay a taxable rate of, say, 5%. And the savings, the difference between the 4% and 5%, so 1% difference, is where the savings come from. You may say, that sounds like tax arbitrage, and we've always sort of learned that that's illegal. And that's true. However, this specific type of transaction has been codified in the US tax law, where it says that tax exempt entities are allowed to prepay for contracted energy and use the savings, the difference between taxable and tax exempt rates. There's been a long history of these transactions. We are not even close to the first ones thinking about this. They started back in the 1990s, I'm told, and there's been about $90 billion raised in these transactions, and I think it's 129 transactions. So a well-laid path ahead of us. Someone had a great idea to apply these types of transactions to the renewable energy sector. And over the last 2.5 years alone, there have been 11 CCA prepaid transactions, and I'll go through the next page. You can see the peers. It's from 6 of our peers. And if you add up all those transactions, it's a transaction value of about $10 billion. And if you add up the savings from all those transactions, it's about $60 million a year across all the CCAs. A potential PCE transaction, we think, we've been talking to advisors, very indicative, depends on market conditions, depends which PPAs we include in these transactions. But if you look at the recent transactions, the savings have been anywhere from 8 to 12% of the contracted energy costs. We would obviously hope on the higher end of that range. But using those as sort of bookends and looking at including at least 3 of our operating PPAs, and we may include more if we so choose, we think we could generate savings of about $3.5 million per year. Those contracted PPAs, which we just selected, and again, there's no, we may decide to include additional PPAs or different PPAs, but the annual procurement costs are about $35 million on those PPAs, so 10% savings is $3.5 million a year. It is a long process, so we are kind of, I wouldn't say we're in the first inning, but maybe the second or third inning. We've been working on this for a little while to evaluate, but from here, it's about a 6 to 9 month process. I've spoken with almost all of the CFOs who've done these transactions, and it could be a little quicker, but for a first time issuer, which we would be, that's probably a pretty good range, 6 to 9 months. And we would engage multiple advisors, which partly why we're here, to get your approval to do that. And we'd also have to join CCCFA, which is the conduit issuer. Importantly, we are not issuing the bonds. They are non-recourse to us. They're not on our balance sheet. CCCFA is the conduit issuer.
Do you want to explain what non-recourse is?
Non-recourse means we are not at risk of paying the interest on the bonds. If we don't pay interest for some reason, we're not.
Non-recourse just means that there's an entity in between the work we're doing and what is happening on the bond issuance, and there's like a veil, like a
firewall.
I would call it like more of a veil than a firewall. It's like there's a piercing of that veil, and Rick, you can kind of elaborate this legally, but essentially the non-recourse, it's like if you have to take out a home loan, the home loan is recourse to your property, but probably not to you specifically. So essentially, there is no way that the creditors can come back and ask Peninsula Clean Energy to pay for the bonds.
As Sean mentioned, we've been working on this since at least June. It was before I joined. The Audit and Finance Committee has been briefed twice on the topic, most recently in February, so a couple months ago. So I apologize if this presentation is somewhat similar. We tried to update it for what we've learned and gotten more smart on the process. And there was also a subset of this team that met with Garth and one of the important lawyers to go through some of the more details of the transaction and understand some of the legal risks as well as the benefits. So that's a high level. I'll go into a little more detail. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions, or at least do my best to answer some of the questions. It is a complex transaction. here is, and I apologize, it's somewhat small. I always try to make it large. This is the list of our peers who have done transactions. You can see, starting back in September, November of 2021, Marin Clean Energy was technically the first CCA that kicked this off. Apparently, Garth got beaten to market by East Bay and Silicon Valley did a joint transaction, much to his chagrin, so he didn't officially launch this. But there were basically two deals, as you can see, way back in the fall of 2021, and since then, there's been 9 more deals. You can also see on this page that several of the CCAs have done multiple transactions. Marin Clean Energy, Silicon Valley, Clean Power Alliance. So I'll go into that in a second. This does not need to be a one and done type deal. We don't have to commit to multiple deals, but if it works, we could do additional deals. We've also sort of heard through the grapevine or rumor mill that Clean Power Alliance is considering a third deal. They actually have an RFP out right now for a prepaid supplier. We also officially know that San Jose Clean Energy is moving forward with a deal. Again, none of these have committed to doing a deal, but they're sort of where we are. And then we've kind of heard rumors that San Diego is also completing a deal. So this list could grow. If we do a transaction, we'll be careful to sequence our transaction so it doesn't come to market at the same time. But I think the punchline here is obviously, a lot of precedent transactions, a lot of lessons for us to learn from. I've talked to all the CFOs. Yes, sorry, Jeff?
Oh, sorry. Just eyeballing this, it looks like sort of the later transactions have resulted in higher discounts, and I'm just curious. Some of that could be just the inflation, the interest rate environment's gone up. The other part could just be familiarity. People just sort of comfortable with them. But do you have any idea for?
Yeah, no, it's probably a little of both. I think mostly it's interest rates. So
Yeah.
the difference that I described between the savings are almost entirely generated from that spread between 4% and 5%. So when interest rates are at an absolute higher level, you have a higher potential for that difference to be wider. When interest rates were at 1% tax, there's not much of an opportunity for savings. So that's why you've seen a lot of, our peers move forward. You can see the rates going up over the discounts gone up over the last few years. There probably is also some familiarity with the structure. So I can't say that's not true, but I think it's mostly just absolute interest rates. So this is, as I was saying, we're not trying to necessarily time the market, but this is a really economically good time to be doing these transactions, just given the high interest rate environment.
And is it not true that we can establish a floor? So we can say, we're not gonna transact for anything under, let's say, 10% or whatever it is, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then you wait.
No, that would be so you don't get into a flipped. You actually can take advantage of the arbitrage, otherwise you're in a flip situation.
Well, so on the initial transaction, maybe this isn't answering.
Go ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to get you off.
No, but yeah, there'll be tons of, one thing I'll say is we are asking approval to sort of move the ball forward, engage advisors, eventually join CCFA. I will say we are not committing to do a deal. It's a 6 to 9 month process. We need to be ready to go. And so we want to start that process. There'll be multiple or off ramps at any time. And so as these savings, if the market changes, if interest rates were to go down or this transaction became sort of out of favor with investors, we could at any time decide not to move forward. And I'll go through what would sort of be our out-of-pocket costs, which thankfully the way these deals are structured would really be minimal. The other thing I think you were referencing, Sean, tell me if I'm forgiven, is when we issue these bonds, this gets in a little bit of the details, so forgive me if I'm getting too much in the minutia. The bond, even though these are 30-year transactions, we are actually only issuing bonds for about 7 years. That's sort of the sweet spot of the tax exempt curve. And so that's where the bankers advise the most savings. So we will lock in savings at these, rates, say 12%, hopefully knock on wood, for 7 years. In 7 years, we will then have to remarket the bonds, and who knows what the interest rate environment is going to be in 7 years. So in that situation, there's explicit language in the documents that there's a floor savings rate, and if we don't achieve that floor, say it's 5%, and that's a negotiated number, we can walk away from the deal. And so we're not committing to a 30-year deal if the markets change.
Thank you, that is.
But it also means that there are future transaction costs that are involved in each reissue.
Sure, yes, definitely. Any other questions on this deal? I think it's Paige. Okay. So the benefits, there's really only one benefit, and that's money, savings. That's the only reason really you would do this deal. As I mentioned, it's been about 8 to 12%, 12% on the more recent deals. On an initial transaction for us, that's about $3.5 million a year. I will highlight again, those savings can fluctuate. You know, I gave you interest rates do move, but that's where it is today. And importantly, the savings will also change based on the size of the transaction. You know, we are in the early innings. We need to put a lot of sort of dot the i's, cross the t's on what an initial transaction would look like for us. But it could grow in size. So we could decide to include additional PPAs if we wanted, so that would grow the $3.5 million. And I'll also highlight, as you saw on that prior page, we can decide to execute subsequent transactions. As you saw, CPA, Marine Clean Energy, Silicon Valley have done multiple deals. So what you do is, as you enter into additional PPAs, or we could hold back PPAs now, enter into additional deals, we could include those PPAs in subsequent deals and grow the amount of savings from 3.5 to double to triple. So that's an important.
And to me, that's the primary reason to do this. It's not about
One and done.
what's possible today, but rather the ability to scale that for savings.
Yes. Thank you. Nick or Sean? It says in this report, assume the inclusion of 3 of our existing PPAs. Why 3?
There's a minimum dollar amount, there's a minimum size transaction you want to execute to make it worth your effort, the cost for the advisors and the time to go through. And if you look at the other deal pages, it's around $500 to $600 million. You can see on this page, Pioneer did one deal for $460 million. But you can see Marine Clean Energy's first deal was about $600 million. To get to that minimum size deal, we would include those 3 PPAs. I think it's Wright, Mustang, and Herbert, but that's just totally straw man at this point. It could grow. We probably wouldn't want to be less than those 3, so it could grow in size. You can see Silicon Valley just did a deal for about $1.1 billion. If we wanted to get to that size, we would include additional PPAs. But at this point, it's very just, we wanted to put some numbers around it. So I wouldn't get too hung up on those 3 PPAs or 3 the number. It's just we wanted to get to a certain size.
Thank you.
I think the minimum of 3 makes sense, but I also think that if there's others, it makes sense to go up, because why do 3 now and expect to do 3 later? Because we have all of that staff focus on an additional transaction. As we add new PPAs, that makes sense to do a future deal, but I'd make the deal larger.
That would
And-
also share that cost. It would reduce that cost per dollar.
Right.
One of the
And the
things. that-
savings are significant. I mean, you can see Silicon Valley's getting about $14 million a year up there from the multiple deals.
So
they've
East
done.
Bay's is 16 million actually.
East Bay did,
If you add the 3 issuances, you got $16 million.
there you go.
One of the things that's also true is that, and this is why it's a little bit TBD. Many of the counterparties that we have are similar to the counterparties of our colleagues here. And they're used to the transaction and it's been written into the agreements. It doesn't mean that we can't invite other counterparties, but I think some of ours have done this and others have not.
Assignment rights,
Yeah. Assignment rights. So there's some of that work to be done, but I completely agree with you that we should do as much as we can now because it just saves us.
There is a limit, similar how there's a minimum size to make it worthwhile, there's also a limit on investor demand. So you can see that the last one was 1.1 billion, so maybe that's the upper limit, but.
Yeah. We don't need to test that limit, but there's a big,
We can't test
big
that.
difference between
no, I agree.
500 and
Marty.
So we have time also to partner with another CCA? Or does it get too complicated?
I mean, you can see the first one was a partnership, so they split the effort, they split the savings. I think we're large enough that we wouldn't need to, and it's probably
Easier.
easier. So I don't think it's necessary.
Not needed. One less phone call to make.
Yeah.
We were cats to her.
Ross, did you ever get it? Let me ask, going back to that though, as they issue, is there, thank you, excuse us,
excuse you, right, Zoom tight, I guess. Do they, if there are other CCAs going out at the same time and not wanting to flood the market with an overissuance, do they work to time that so that the
Yeah.
demand is?
We would definitely want a sequence, so we're not all coming to market on the same week, month. I mean, if the market's really strong, maybe it's that benefit outweighs the cost of too much in one week. But we
And
want-
is demand growing for these issues? Are institutional investors and private individuals understanding what these are and
Yeah,
demand
it's
is
a,
expanding? Who buys these?
it's,
I
the
get
number one, it's a small group, as you can imagine, and the banks, the Morgan Stanleys, the Goldman are trying to grow the pool.
Mhm.
It's dominated by Vanguard, Capital, Fidelity. There's a select group, and obviously it's to our benefit to expand that growth, but they have, unfortunately, it seems like influence on the pricing, and so, but it is not as dispersed as you'd expect in sort of the investment grade bond market.
Okay.
You've done your research.
Mhm.
So as I said, the main benefit is savings. The others here, I wouldn't even call them reasons to do a deal, but I think they're positive attributes. The second bullet point is that most all of the fees are paid from the bond proceeds and and on a contingency basis, meaning if for whatever reason we decide to not do a deal because we get skittish, the market turns, whatever the reason, no one gets paid. We are really not out of pocket except for two exceptions. And those exceptions are staff time. So my time, Sean's time, board time, there's an opportunity cost there because we could be spending time elsewhere, so it's something to be considered. We do have to join CCCFA. That is a sunk cost, that is not a contingency basis. Because that will wait as long as possible to join CCCFA, so probably late summer, early fall. And the rating agencies, if they're gonna do work, they wanna get paid, so that's not a contingency fee. We again will wait to engage them pretty late in the process, so no out-of-pocket cost today or for the next month or several months. And then the final one we already talked about, this is non-recourse to PC. It's not a reason to do the deal, but it's a great attribute. So risks, what are the risks? Why not do this deal? And Sean and I have been asking everyone this question. I've spent a lot of time with our advisors, talking with our CFOs, what am I missing? And there's really not many. The first one is, as I described, if for whatever reason the prepaid terminates earlier than expected. The one example we talked about where we go to remarket the bonds and the market is not as strong, we don't reach that minimum threshold. All that happens is all the contracts basically revert to their old, it's not a technical term, their old way. And so the negative is we don't get the savings for 30 years. We were expecting $3.5 million for 30 years. We only get it for 7 years. We're no worse off than we were before, but I don't know if I called it a risk, but it's just a consideration. The second one is market timing, and we will do a deal on one day, as Donna said, and that we're hoping that day is the best day it can be, so we'll try our best to pick the right day. But there is a risk that 3 months after, 6 months after, the market's even better. Maybe this discount could be 14%, and we'll wish, why did we do it then? It's not really a risk not to do it, and the way that risk is kind of mitigated is multiple deals. You're sort of averaging in the transaction. That could be a reason not to have the first deal so large, because you can do another deal in 6 months. The market could also get worse. We don't know. If we knew where the market was going, I always joke we'd be working at a hedge fund, but all right. Third consideration is staff time. So this will take a fair amount of my time and my staff's time. The benefit here is we have a lot of transactions who've gone before us. If you talk to Garth, that first deal took them over a year, tons of work, and all the documentation is this high. We obviously, there's a ton of, dupe and revising and leveraging what's gone before us, so we will leverage all those transactions before us. And we have to hire a financial advisor, and so there's a cost to that, it's paid out of the proceeds, but we will get the benefit of their staff time. And then the final risk or issue is there will be some increased complexity post-deal. We've talked to, Roy's talked to his counterparts at other CCAs, and it is a little more complex post-deal. You have to basically pay every invoice is basically split into 2 invoices. And if anything goes wrong, or if there's any changes, you're just dealing with multiple parties. We'll obviously evaluate, and if maybe needed, have to hire an additional staff, 3.5 million of savings, hopefully can justify that cost. We may not need to, maybe it's just an additional work to get up to speed on a new process, and then it's, off and running, but just something to be considered. The team, it is a large team. There's a lot of people feeding at the trough, maybe it's not.
That might be how people.
Public
consider it.
meeting.
A lot of fees paid out. I have to admit, a lot of parties involved putting together those pile of legal documents. So I just walked through who's on the team. We obviously, we're ahead of the team there. We do have to hire a municipal financial advisor. That's a requirement for all municipal issuers. This is a party that will advise us. They have a fiduciary responsibility to look out for our behalf. We recently completed a RFP. There are really only 2 firms who have done all these deals, and we've decided that we want to recommend moving forward with PFM. It's a firm we worked with in the past. Mike Baumgartner, I think some of you guys may know. He's been around from the beginning, started at the beginning of CCA world. He's done, of the 6 CCAs who've done deals, he's advised on 4 of them. MCM is the other party we looked at, they've advised on 2. So both parties could have easily done the deal, we just felt a little more comfortable with PFM. We will also need legal advisor. We met with several of the law firms. We recommend engaging Chapman and Cutler. This guy Doug Bird, who some of you have met, has worked on all of these prior CCA deals except for one where he was conflicted out, so clearly a subject matter expert. I think in these highly structured, complex deals, it's really important to have someone who's done them before. We will need to join CCCFA, as I already mentioned. And then the final box on the right, the one party we haven't really decided on is we'll need to hire, it's called a prepaid supplier, but it's really the investment bank who's going to issue these bonds on our behalf. There's really only Morgan Stanley and Goldman are the only 2 firms who've done deals in California on those CCAs. RBC is another firm to consider. One of the first responsibilities of PFM will to help us launch an RFP and decide which of these 3 firms we want to work with. So that's sort of the next step in the process. And then the other thing I'll highlight on this page is we do need bond and tax counsel. Obviously, this is a very highly complex tax transaction. Orrick Harrington, local firm, has done all of the prior CCA deals, and that's the firm we would recommend engaging. CCCFA actually engages them, so I'm not sure if we'll need board approval, but we'll figure that out over the next week or so before we go to the board, but that's the firm we'd like to work with. Preliminary timeline, obviously a ton of detail behind these big boxes, but just to give you an idea of the process and where we are. As I mentioned, we presented to the Audit and Finance Committee in February. And over the last 3 months, we've been conducting this RFP for a financial advisor. We've been talking to tax legal counsel. And at this point, we're seeking approval to engage those 2 parties or 3 parties. The next step in the process will be an RFP for the investment bank, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, or RBC. We will have to join CCCFA. As I mentioned, that is a sunk cost, so we've pushed that towards later in the process. We are seeking approval now just to get so that we can move quickly when we want, but that'll probably happen late summer, maybe it gets pushed to early fall, depending on the process. And then you've got a lot of work to be done to finalize documents, work with the rating agencies. I put the red box there just to show that we're not asking for board approval to do the deal. This is just to sort of continue to move the ball forward. The board will, we will seek board approval probably sometime in the fall, a couple months before we actually go to market. There's a lot of documents we'll need approval to sign, contracts to engage into, and then just approval to do the deal. Excuse me. And so that will be coming, I put an estimate of September, it could be October, so sometime in that period. So in summary, we're asking for you to recommend approval to the board to continue to evaluate and sort of pursue a potential transaction. To do so, we will need to engage the advisors we mentioned. Hopefully a reference savings we think are material. 3.5 million could grow, could double. Risks seem to be negligible, if non-existent, and the upfront costs really are minimal. I've mentioned this before, we can pause the process at any time. If the market changes or we decide we have other higher important priorities. We do need to engage the selected advisors. These are again paid on contingency. So if the deal doesn't happen, no one gets paid. Seems like a weird business model, but that's the way it's set up. So PFM is our financial advisor, Chapman and Cutler as prepaid counsel, and Oric as bond and tax counsel. We're also seeking approval to join CCCFA at the appropriate time, so probably late summer, early fall. And then importantly, we'll return as many times as asked, but with periodic updates to both the finance committee and the executive committee. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have to seek board approval for the transaction probably sometime in the fall.
Okay. Complicated, yeah, really nice job. Thank you, Nick. That was, I've heard this, I think now 3 or 4 times, so, I gets better and better with each.
Okay, I've learned a lot myself.
Well done. So I wanna go ahead and open it up to questions that we all have. Then have the public comment in case there is any, and then we'll come back and people can kind of summarize their thoughts. And I think we need a vote on this. It's an action item of
Yes.
whether to move it to the full board review. Questions? And I have a couple if anybody wants to think while I ask. So I'll go ahead. So I just wanted to ask 2 things. So there's 7 years, you explained it pretty well, but I want to make sure I understand it. This is because of where the yield curve is. So 7 years kind of maximizes the spread.
Yeah, so the tax exempt market doesn't give you as much benefit past long term because people don't know what the tax laws are gonna be. And so the sweet spot, the biggest delta is sort of around between 5 and 8 years. And so we could do a 30-year deal, we just wouldn't get the 12%
Okay.
savings.
So I think,
And also, sorry, before,
No,
there's a, because the previous deals, you could do 10 years, but maybe it's a 10% discount, or we could decide to do 5 years and it's 12, and it's
Yeah.
like getting a mortgage, you
Okay.
decide what you wanna
so we
do.
look at that. I think I'm kind of in the written document, sort of pumping that up a little, like explaining that a little more might be
Sure.
helpful to people. And then also explaining the sort of reissuance, how then these sort of turn over every 7 years, like the mechanics behind that. So at the, say for like an example might be helpful. We picked 7 years when that term ended.
Sure.
How would mechanics work? That it would, like 2 years in advance, do we have to start thinking about it? You know,
Probably not 2, but you
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
wait till
that
obviously.
give a little like summary of how the ending situation is. And why, like where it fits in on the yield curve, maybe show like a chart that shows, here's the yields, here's why we picked this, you know, maybe an example of like a case study almost
Sure.
of how it did and what will happen. I think that could be really helpful to people. I think Colleen's graph is really helpful, so maybe
For me.
commandeer that.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
And
I would take a picture of that on your phone and take a look at it, because usually someone who figures something like that, anyway, it's all kind of you. And then the second question is, how do we count for the $3.5 million on our financial statements? Is because it's like, we kept talking about it's revenue diversification, but what's really clear is it's not revenue, it's cost savings.
Yeah.
So we're gonna save money, but how does that look? Do we book a payment, then a second payment, and then I mean, how does that translate through? And how do we articulate, if someone was reading our financial statements and they saw this and they said, wow, you did this huge machination with this refinance and everything. How can I, as an outside viewer, assess by reading the financial statements, the benefit of doing that? Is it in a footnote?
I don't know. I don't think it will be clear. I could confirm, I don't think it'll be clear on the financial statements. The way it'll be recorded is just a reduction of costs. So instead of, in our example, $35 million of our procurement costs, or $400 million, but it'll be $3.5 million less.
Okay,
So that would be the, and I don't think it'll show up. I can confirm and get back to you.
so if there were a way to footnote that or have it in the executive summary or some, I think, or I just don't know, like, if it did, maybe it doesn't matter that the public knows, but if someone's poking around and wondering why we're issuing these bonds, or somehow, and they start asking questions, and you go to the financial statements and there's no
Okay.
reference to it whatsoever, or what it's doing, or how we're saving money, it seems like it could be,
Okay.
as a governmental agency, it just feels like there should be some transparency around it.
I mean, I can see when these deals get done, as you can imagine, they all put together big press releases highlighting.
Sure.
So that is PR, that when Marin did their most recent, or Silicon Valley, generating savings, good for customers, but I will check on the financial statements. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if it's in there.
And then I have a comment on the sort of magnitude of the 3.5 million that only became nuanced to me afterwards. Questions? Yes.
Just a comment. So it can be used to lower rates or fund customer program. And I like you're bringing this up. I think part of the transparency would be greater if we name what it's for. Rather than just saying, well, let's get together and decide what we want to do with this.
But it's not really anything, there's nothing to do, there's no thing.
It
It's
just reduces cost.
Yeah,
Just reduces
yeah, it's a
cost.
cost, yeah, it's an avoided
Which,
cost.
you know,
Which
with
helps
our
the
new-
bottom line.
With, well, with our new rate making,
Yeah.
that will lead to lower rates.
That's what I'm thinking. If we were able to say, we're doing this for this goal.
For cost savings, which ultimately
Right.
lowers rates.
Right.
I think it's complicated to say, and then we're gonna invest it in a program,
Yeah.
because there is
No
no.
money
Right,
coming in.
I
Exactly.
think it's easier to say all of this is an effort to maintain low or competitive.
Right.
Rates.
It's avoided.
put it-
Yeah, I like that. Mhm, mhm. Andrew, sorry, can't see you hiding back.
Again, from a power purchase question standpoint or angle standpoint, how does it alter our payment schedule to a power supplier with this program? If there's risk.
There's
involved
no
with that?
risk, but it is more complex, as I mentioned. We, Roy, I don't know if Roy's on the phone. We've had several calls with Morgan Stanley and they send us schematics. But there is, funds are definitely not flowing as simple as they were before. So we will have to pay CCCFA, which in turn pays the bank, who pays the PPA provider, is the way it works.
So
So
then are we still paying them as we purchase the power, or are we paying?
we are no
upfront?
longer, we are not paying the PPA provider anymore. For
The bond, the
the
bond
is- the
proceeds.
bond proceeds are, so there's, and they have to get comfortable with that, they just wanna get paid, they don't care who sends them the check, so to speak.
I understand that, but the schedule of those payments, are we not prepaying them?
It's fun, we are not, it's funny, I'm talking to one
weird
bank, one bank said, we've tried to argue to change the name, because in reality, we're not prepaying for anything, no one's getting prepaid. Yeah, it's weird, and that is what it's called, and that's what the tax zip code allows you if you're prepaying for something.
So
we are-
it's a payment schedule.
Same payment schedule, yeah, we pay just at a discounted rate, yeah.
And then there's a clause in our PPAs that's a transferability clause that I believe is in a number of our PPAs already. Roy and I, we've been talking about that. Just in the eventuality that we would do something like this, but I think we might have to go back and add it into some of our older.
Got it.
PPAs. So that's all part of the
69
minutia
months, yeah.
that lives behind each of those boxes.
As the funds are transferred, how are they custodied along the way?
There is a trustee, so it's US Bank, I think, has done most of them, or Wells Fargo. So I believe that's the entity that's doing that. We haven't gotten, to be honest, that far in the
Okay.
process, so.
Okay, so to me, Carlos, that would be one of the risks, is like the movement of funds along the way. If somewhere along the way something broke down, wouldn't necessarily, I guess it wouldn't be recourse to us. But that, okay,
But I have a question, so the costs that we incur related to this, I assume aren't netted against the savings.
They are.
They are netted against
The
the.
numbers, I mean, again, our numbers are indicative, but.
So,
they're-
well,
Yeah,
Anyway, he's saying it's gonna show up on the books, but
But- the savings are gonna show as a savings for the cost of our power.
Correct.
But the cost we have to CCCFA and to whatever other advisors we have in the deal.
Yeah.
Are they netted against those savings?
They are,
So we don't show a cost
no
anymore.
cost to us, no.
But wait,
So
hold
Donna's
on.
question
I
is
gotta get
really
clear.
good then. That's really important, exactly how it shows on our
That's what I was
financial
talking
statements.
about.
Right, because that, and we will, I'm taking notes here too. But why would we not show, for example, the $50,000 membership
We would be,
be on our budget? We would on
would.
our expense.
yes.
I don't think so, I think
All
it
right.
flows from the.
So it's a question.
Yeah, it's a
Why don't you
question
look
for us
into
to
it at the
figure
same
it out.
time you look into
It's, there's so, other people,
No.
Yeah, but we've been told that even staff time, you can expense the transaction. I mean, it's taking from Peter to pay Paul, it comes out of the same
So
money,
we
but
should know how that gets reflected on
Yeah.
the financials. That's, I mean, that makes it even more interesting, right?
I am. Yeah, well, I'll confirm, I'm pretty sure the cost of CCFA, the rating agencies, definitely the advisor fees, all come out of the proceeds, there's
Okay.
no expense to us.
it's a little probably a bit like, when we get returns from PFM. They are net of investment management fees, custodian fees, transaction fees, all of those fees are net, and we only see the dollar delivered. I'm guessing it's analogous to something like that.
We're not seeing any dollar delivery. This is the inverse of what the federal
Right, it's
government
the,
does
it's the inverse.
for its tax credits. Basically, they consider it, OMB considers this off book. What it basically means is they give a tax credit, it doesn't show up in the annual budget.
Yes,
But they have a way of calculating that it wasn't a loss, but it didn't come into the, I was actually looking up, I was remembering it from finance class in
Yeah,
college,
yeah.
that this is the inverse of that.
yeah,
So however they would structure it on their books might be how we would want to structure it on ours, but it's the inverse, because we're saving the money as opposed to the federal government by giving tax credits to homeowners for, their property. Anyway, so quickly, we don't have anybody who has, I'm sorry, may I ask?
yes, of course.
We don't have anybody yet who has gone into the seventh year and unwound a deal.
Not of the CCAs.
Right.
There's been gas, obviously all the gas deals, but none of those deals have obviously come to the reset yet.
So we don't know what this would look like if we were in an interest rate environment, if for whatever other internal reason we decided not to go forward on the 8th year. We don't know how difficult it would be to just say, locking the door, going back to the old, process. Do you imagine that there would be any complexities related to that?
I will say, I've been told that the remarketing in 7 years will take time, so that's a consideration. And it's not as simple as just.
Calling your lender and say
Refinance, so it is effort in 7 years. I'll leave it at that.
But if we don't remarket.
But if we don't, I don't know. None of the CCAs have obviously gotten to that point. There's been 129 gas deals that I know have been remarketed. I don't know how many of those have not been remarketed. I can try and get some insight on that.
But I think, well, we'll verify, but my understanding is if we don't remarket, we unwind and it comes back to us and we have the same terms that
doing
we
what
have
we're doing
today.
Teacher's asking is, how hard is that?
How hard is it?
Yeah, what's the plan? Okay,
So is there any problem, I know Jen's on, is there any problem to have PFM as a financial advisor when we actually have PFM handling our investments? No.
We do, but
Right, so it's just a question to ask. And secondly, for some of us, and it just happened to be that my bank merged with Morgan Stanley, they're actually handling my investments. Is that a conflict for me? If Morgan Stanley is, and some of us may indeed have those financial advisors, so that's just a question that I'd like to know. I'm perfectly fine recusing myself in the future. I'm just saying that's.
my guess is, so having dealt with this a lot over the years, my guess is so long as it's a fully discretionary relationship, like, for example, if you went in and bought these bonds yourself, possibly, or your broker put them in your account. So I'm gonna look into that too, for my husband's business too, like, I need to tell him that our particular bonds should be on their no-buy list.
Okay, yeah, and Jen's on and she,
Yeah.
can think about
So
that.
I think it's a good question, like, just, are there any disclosure or reporting or any kind of other requirements that we need to write to the FPPC or something about it. I think it's fine.
I see Jennifer just
Jen,
made her
Jen.
picture available. I don't know if she's about to say
Jen,
something.
do you want to say something there?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was not a panelist for some reason, so I've been listening to everyone's concerns. I do think that the potential conflict issue is not a big one, given the position of other CCAs who have engaged in these kind of arrangements, but we can certainly look into it in more depth. As far as the personal conflict issue, I do want to look at that in more depth as well in terms of reporting requirements with the state. So I will circle back with everyone on that. It's a really good point.
Right,
Those are my only questions.
okay.
Thank you.
And then the last kind of thought I wanted to throw out here was, when we look at a savings of 3.5 million on our very large amount of revenue, it can seem like a lot of tedious work for, in comparison, a small amount. But as we voted last week and we're moving to this more cost of service model, and we're going to be shrinking down that revenue. In other words, we're going to hopefully be keeping rates down and our income lower. As if we get to a more normal margin, where say our margin's like 10% or even 20% or 15%, whatever our margin ends up being, not 100, whatever, the 3.5 in savings will become more and more important and more. Yeah, right. Yes, exactly. And as that squishes down and down, it could become 10%, it could become 20%, 30%. If it ever got, I don't know, but
So I would be careful.
well, I'm not sure, but I'm just saying, if it just depends on if we had a negative year,
Agreed.
that obviously, and it's 3.5 million a year, right? That's per year.
Well, but it's
possibly-
3.5 on revenue, the revenue's not gonna change.
Right, the revenue, well,
It reduces our
The net-
revenue requirement.
okay, got it. But all I'm saying is that those numbers have been pretty dispersed, and they're probably gonna get a little closer, so it will become more relevant as a way to, it's not gonna diversify, in other words, it's not a diversification of income
Agreed.
conversation, it's a cost saving reduction.
Avoided cost,
Avoided cost.
which from
Which-
where I sit, it all matters.
Yes.
right? Because at the end of the
Right.
day, if we can
Yeah.
avoid cost or bring different revenue in that is not on the backs of a ratepayer,
Yeah.
all of that matters. So even if, in my own mind, I'm like, listen, if we could get to a point, whether it's through avoided cost or additional revenue outside of the energy efficiency designation, which is potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. But even if we could cover staff costs, for example,
Mm-hmm.
that's not,
Yeah.
that's not a drop in the bucket, and that's a great way to say to our ratepayers, we're doing everything we can to reduce the impact on you.
Okay,
So agreed. Thank you, Donna.
no, I was getting a little confused at first about revenue diversification versus cost saving, so I wanna make
Fair
sure.
enough.
Carlos?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about how this gets reflected in our financial statements, and it seems to me that at a minimum, it would be a note in the audit, right? That would indicate this transaction happened, and so.
Maybe I need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you do that, but I'm just
I
thinking.
think it's gonna be covered in a note, but you'll find
I'll
out.
find out.
It's been done.
Another deal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Go find out, yeah, go find out the others.
And then you can correct them. Tell them how it's done.
We'll do all this homework and then it'll be part of, I'm imagining an updated staff report to reflect all these answers.
Are there other, yes, Marty?
Just a comment.
Yeah, please, let me take public,
comment, sure.
let me take public comment quickly, if we don't have any more questions. Are there any members of the public who have a comment on item 3? Right, seeing none, Nelly, we have none here, no one sent in an email? Okay. So we'll go ahead and close public comment and then I'll take summary remarks.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Nick, and staff for putting this together. Each time we hear it, it's a little bit more, makes a little more sense. It's just that this is complicated and looking out for our ratepayers and whether we save the money or however we can reduce the cost of our operations. I think this is a worthwhile effort. So I just wanted to make sure that to show our appreciation for the work that has been done, and we're looking forward to seeing how this is all going to work out.
I totally agree. I think that's well said.
I agree.
I was just gonna say, thank Rick for being determined to get this. We were all, this was over drinks that three of us were having a conversation. It was
Dinner.
it was hard to penetrate, but there was some interest there, and Nick and Rick continued to bring it back and say, look, let's look at this more succinctly. Let's put it under a fine magnifying glass, and here we are. So thanks, Rick, for saying, look, this may make sense. So, thanks for that leadership.
Anders, you're good? Just want to check with everyone, okay? Do we have a motion to accept the report and make a recommendation to explore this at the board level?
So moved.
Okay, I'll take Rick as the motion, and Anders, will you the second? Anders is the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great.
I was drinking ginger ale.
You were great. You can get that on the public record. So the last item on our agenda are committee member reports. Is anyone, I just want to ask, is anyone going next week down to San Jose or?
Yeah. lots
You're
of
gonna
us
go,
are.
you're gonna go. Okay, I'm gonna kind of be in and out, back and forth. I'm dealing with a few things up here. Okay,
I think there are 8 board members attending, which is great.
okay. Maybe we could put together a little WhatsApp chat or something, or text or something, so we can all just kind of, I'd love to be able to just say like, hey, where is everyone, and kind of communicate.
Yeah,
If
great
that's
idea.
okay.
Up there.
I don't know if you want, I can put it together or if you want. You can do it, just something so.
All of you on WhatsApp? Is everybody on WhatsApp?
No.
We can do it just right.
The text is fine.
We'll do it next.
I don't know if anybody's.
Probably doing text is once you set it up and you have somebody who's outside of
Yeah,
if it's an iPhone text, you cannot get the Google folks in. So that's why the WhatsApp is just so much more,
to update you.
it's so easy, really.
And get you on.
No more. You too.
You need to know where you
Same here.
Thanks, Jimmy. So yeah, maybe a little WhatsApp for those who are on it. Is it? Okay. Committee member reports then, anyone have anything? I have one, which is Sean came to Burlingame and made a presentation to our council. It was an excellent presentation. It was incredibly well received by the council. Really appreciate, I think everyone just really appreciated the communication style and the sort of quantifiable changes in electric bills. And it was also really good for us to be able to have a little snippet that we can share. I'm going to talk to our communications team about maybe putting a little something together on our e-news and, with a few highlights, and the video was excellent. So the video was really good. So really encourage everyone to get her on your agenda.
Be in Pacifica tonight. And I think Mark has the whole schedule, but I think we're about 2/3 of the way through, maybe 3/4 with scheduling. My goal is to touch every council, hopefully before, November, maybe even before then.
It's a really huge job and requires a lot of late nights. And I just want to thank staff for.
Wait, so you said that people recognize changes on their electric bill?
No, it's a way for us to promote that there have been,
Oh.
I would
Yeah,
say,
no, it's a way to promote.
yeah.
I don't know anyone who can understand their electric bill.
No one can. And in fact, if you read next door, you really understand that people really, really, really don't understand what's going on. But I was thinking, like, how can we, maybe you can help us, Sean, if there's a little, we can take a blurb out of the video or something, or we have that one pager, but just, I want to follow up with some more outreach to the community through the e-newsletter saying, this is what we're saving, here's what's going on. I think after you come, it's a good thing because then people can go back and you can reference the Granicus tape and people can take a look at the messaging. So really appreciate you coming.
We started working with Gwen. We have a chamber publication, since we're a small city, goes out to all the businesses, all the residents, everybody actually reads it. And we're running an article every single month about energy topics featuring clean energy.
Oh, wow.
For a whole
brilliant.
year, and it may be renewed
Can you
next
share
year,
that with us?
no cost.
Can you share it with us?
Yeah, I think Gwen is sending that out more broadly as well, but I'll
Yeah.
double check.
It-
She's
it-
watching that.
It's a good kind of a test run.
Oh, excellent.
That was the first.
Oh, and it's
In-
named the luminary, of course.
Yeah. Not that I have another- that's only a copy.
I love it. Thank you.
I will also let you guys know that I am speaking at a chamber, since you mentioned the chamber. I'm speaking at a chamber leadership program this coming Friday. With a couple of
And you
other
guys, oh, the other thing
panelists.
I would mention real quick is we're in the middle of our little solar eclipse right now, so.
Right.
Yeah, it's going on right now.
We need to go look at
Yes, yes. Oh, hand. who?
Oh, Jennifer.
Oh,
Yes.
Jen. Oh, Jen, please.
Hi,
you
all.
can-
I just wanted to also interject in terms of WhatsApp chat. We do have to be mindful about the Brown Act. So it would have to be kind of one-sided in terms of logistics. There wouldn't be able to be any other communication on that. And I know that it does present some risk with communication in that style. So just your friendly lawyer flagging that for everybody.
it. Thank you, friend.
This is the Cal CCA.
Yeah, we probably can't.
We won't have. We won't have-
Committee.
We might have a formal meeting.
Anyway,
We'll just have to text each other directly, like, where are you? Where are you? What are we doing? Nope.
If it's logistics and where you're gonna be having dinner, I don't think that falls within the Brown Act.
Correct. Yes.
Is like, where's the meeting? But we can do it, I think, or just make sure everybody has everybody's contact.
Location and logistics are perfectly fine. But when there is a group chat, it does tend to edge on issue.
Yeah, please.
are any of you going to the progress seminar? Which is next weekend, right? Great, so we'll see you there. Mark's gonna be there the whole time. I'm going up on Saturday and speaking on a panel. And then we'll look for you
Friday night.
Friday night, okay. All right, that's it, thank you.
Perfect. So if there's no other information, then I think everyone's excused. Carlos, can I talk to you after?